order. Welcome to meeting number 28 of the House of Commons Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. Please you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English or French. Please select your preference. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are not speaking, please make sure that your microphone is on mute. I also ask, for the sake of the interpreters, to make sure that if you move your microphone when you're not speaking, that you put it back in the position between your upper lip and your nose, and that you do not talk over each other, because it will prevent the interpreters from being able to do their good work. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. As is my normal practice, I will hold up a yellow card for when you have 30 seconds left in your intervention. I will hold up a red card for when your time for intervention is expired. Please make sure that you have the gallery view on your Zoom so that you can see me waving the card. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, March 19th, 2021, the committee is meeting today to resume its study on the proposed acquisition of Shaw by Rogers. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. We have today Professor Michael Geist, Canadian Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce at the University of Ottawa. Professor Dwayne Winzik, Professor, School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University. From the Canadian Media Concentration Research Project, Ben Klass, Senior Research Associate. From Competitive Network Operators of Canada, Mr. Matt Stein, President and Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Jeff White, Director, Legal and Regulatory Affairs. From eBox Inc., nous avons Jean-Philippe Baillic, Président.
We have Jean-Philippe Baillic, the CEO.
County Mayor Jim Wood. And from Vivek Research, Ms. Robin Shaban, co-senior economist. Each witness will present for up to 3 minutes and followed by rounds of questions. With that, we will start with Professor Geist. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Great, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to come back and appear before the committee. My name is Michael Geist. I'm a law professor at the University of Ottawa, where I hold the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law, and I'm a member of the Center for Law, Technology and Society. I appear in a personal capacity representing only my own views. To the best of my recollection, a 3-minute opening statement is the shortest I've experienced for a committee appearance. In this instance, however, I think it's appropriate, as it doesn't take much more than 3 minutes to understand what is at play and at stake with the proposed Rogers-Shaw merger. I'd like to make 3 points to start. First, and I think this is stating the obvious, the deal will result in higher prices and less competition in the Canadian wireless market. There's no need to overthink this. Removing a company that some have touted as the best chance at a viable national carrier will leave some of Canada's biggest markets, notably Ontario, Alberta, and BC, without a much-needed competitor. While some seek to justify it or explain it away, the simple reality is that Canadians already pay some of the highest prices for wireless services in the world. If this merger is approved, the situation is likely to get worse. Indeed, when Rogers promises that it will not raise prices for Shaw Freedom Mobile customers for 3 years, it effectively signals that it will be raising them as soon as the clock runs out on that timeline. Second, this represents a major wireless policy failure. Successive governments have pledged to address high wireless costs, but have often instead taken half measures or even backtracked at opposition from the incumbent providers. The CRTC is little better, with the current leadership having dispensed with the prioritization of consumers. It's the CRTC that initially rejected mandated MVNOs, the CRTC that signaled it was supportive of increasing consumer broadband costs with new levies in its harnessing change report, and it's CRTC that sparked a consumer group boycott of the development of an internet code that was ostensibly designed to protect consumers. Third, what should the committee be recommending? The preferable choice is no merger, since it's likely to result in lost jobs, higher prices, and less competition. If approved with conditions, the grab bag of goodies proposed by Rogers is really just asking consumers to ultimately pay for rural and remote connectivity initiatives. We need that connectivity, but funding it through a harmful merger is not the right way to do it. Instead, the focus should be on competition, particularly wireless competition. For the purposes of this transaction, I think that means full divestiture of the wireless assets. More broadly, it means doubling down on policies designed to address wireless competition, in particular, support for mandated MVNOs that would help change the competitive landscape, and efforts to increase foreign entrance into the marketplace. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Professor Winsick and Mr. Klaas. I understand you're sharing a 6-minute slot, so please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I would like to suggest to you that if you'd like to follow along, we have tweeted out our presentation under the INDU hashtag. We'll cover some data, and you can see some of the visuals that we made to go along with it there. So on slide 1, the proposed mega merger between Canada's second and fourth largest comms and media conglomerates, Rogers and Shaw, would, if approved, significantly lessen competition. The merger would catapult Rogers even further ahead in the mobile wireless market, and it would become the biggest cable TV and internet access provider in Canada. It triggers all the criteria used by competition and communication regulators to assess these kinds of deals. It would also overturn a decade and a half of policies by successive conservative and liberal governments alike to foster a fourth maverick mobile operator in all regions of the country. Third slide. That policy has made solid progress. Videotron has carved out close to 20% market share in Quebec and the NCR, while Eastlink has roughly 10% of the mobile wireless market in the Maritime provinces, and Shaw has gained over just 8% in market share in BC, Alberta, and Ontario. This transaction would eliminate Shaw-owned Freedom Mobile as a significant competitor in those 3 provinces, which include 2 of our biggest cities, Toronto and Vancouver, and the nation's capital, with knock-on effects across the country. Next slide. The deal would also significantly raise concentration levels nationally in the mobile wireless market. 5G will require substantial. They handled similar challenges in the past, though, and there's no reason to doubt their capabilities now. Shaw actually plows proportionally more of its revenue back into upgrading its fiber and mobile wireless networks than Rogers.
Professor Winsick, one moment. I think we have a point of order. Mr. Lemire?
There was a little bit of a break in the sound, but then the sound came back. So I think I missed a couple of things.
Professor Winsick, if perhaps you could slow down a little. I know you're pressed on time just so that the interpreters can do their work, and I've stopped the clock, so please, I'll start it again. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm very sorry, Mr. Lemire, and to the translators. Okay, the merger, we need to recognize, is not the only option. Rogers and Shaw could build on existing network sharing agreements like Rogers does with Quebecor in Ontario and Quebec, and Bell and Telus do nationwide, or they could strike deals to share fiber and radio access networks. We also have to wonder about Rogers' debt equity load, which is twice that of Shaw and will soar further if this deal is approved in light of the upcoming 3,500 megahertz spectrum auction and when it renews Hockey Night in Canada rights in 2026. How can Rogers and Shaw verify the commitments? How can they be tracked and verified? While Rogers and Shaw anticipate deploying 5G and other wireless networks to meet their pledges, most communities want fiber, not wireless connections. Regardless, those communities that are trying to build their own networks across the country are facing endless obstructionist tactics from incumbents rather than willing and reliable partners. Next slide. Canada's lucrative $29.2 billion mobile wireless market is not a small market. In fact, it's the 8th largest mobile wireless market in the world. Over to Ben.
Compared to the big 3, Shaw offers more affordable wireless plans, more monthly data, no overage fees, and other unique innovative features. Its presence has forced Bell, Rogers, and Telus to respond by themselves, lowering prices and offering new features. This is how competition is supposed to work. However, there's still room for improvement. Prices in Canada have fallen more slowly than in other countries, while data caps have not kept pace. This is confirmed by a preponderance of the independent research on Canada's high wireless prices, shown, for instance, by the Wall and Nordicity reports commissioned for the CRTC and ISED, the US FCC, OECD, the ITU, Rewheel, and the Competition Bureau, amongst others. With Shaw out of the picture, the trajectory of improvement that we're currently on will be reversed. Rogers' pledge, furthermore, to maintain prices for Freedom customers isn't nearly good enough, even as an opening bid. We know this because Bell made a similar promise when it absorbed MTS in 2017. Today, Manitoba's mobile services, once the envy of the rest of the country, have lost their edge. We need to be hearing about lower prices, more data, and greater adoption of new services. These are all things that are delivered by competition, not consolidation. For over a decade, adoption levels for mobile wireless services in Canada have languished at the bottom of the ranks amongst OECD countries. This merger promises to keep prices high and will therefore only help to cement our position as a laggard. In addition to lowering prices, regional operators like Shaw have increased data caps. However, mobile data usage in Canada is still only one half the OECD average and about 1/3 of what it is in the US. We're about 3 to 5 times years behind the US, and letting Shaw disappear would set us even further back. Dwayne?
25 years ago, Rogers and Shaw carved up cable and internet access markets into Cable Monopoly East and Cable Monopoly West. This leads some to believe that a tie-up today will have minimal to no effects on either of these markets. While it is true that they did not compete with one another head-to-head thereafter, Shaw's earlier embrace of new cable network and set-top box technology revealed it to be the more innovative of the two firms, while also forcing TELUS to roll out IPTV and fiber to the home 5 years earlier than Bell in Ontario and Quebec. Shaw's decision to not enforce data limits on internet subscribers after Netflix arrived in Canada in 2010, while other big ISPs did, revealed these limits for what they are: artificial constraints on people's use of the internet. If this deal goes through, Shaw's customers will have to get used to counting their downloads against the meters. The proposed Rogers-Shaw deal will also have considerable impact on Canadian TV, film, and culture. Ben, take it home, please.
Let's be clear, this merger is simply a play by Rogers to extend its dominance from coast to coast. Now is not time during the pandemic for even more consolidation. This merger will result in higher prices and less innovation when what we need is greater affordability. Regulators and policymakers should do what they can to oppose this merger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to Competitive Network Operators of Canada. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Just verifying. Good day and thank you. I'm Matt Stein and I'm appearing today as Chair of Competitive Network Operators of Canada, or CNOC. I'm joined by Jeff White, our Director, Legal and Regulatory Affairs. Jeff also teaches communications law at the University of Ottawa. Unlike many of my co-panelists, I'm not an academic. I'm a business person. I'm the CEO of Distributel, one of the largest independent ISPs in the country. In other words, if you have questions about the state of telecom competition, I live it every day. CNOC is the industry association for the competitive side of the industry, the side of the industry that acts as a check on the market power of the large telephone and cable companies. Our more than 30 members use wholesale access to the large companies' wires to compete against them on price, innovation, and customer service. It's called service-based competition, which is different from facilities-based competition. The difference is who owns the infrastructure. The infrastructure owners own the wires or the spectrum, and we lease part of it from them. That's all. The Rogers-Shaw deal does not benefit Canadians. If it proceeds, it will only benefit the two companies and Bell and TELUS, unless our government and its regulators get on the same page about the need for service-based competition. Simply put, there are only two ways this merger can go ahead. Freedom Mobile, originally Wind, was the competitive instigator in most of Canada's largest wireless markets. Eliminating that instigator is unacceptable. Without an adequate, mandated MVNO regime that allows competition to flourish, Freedom Mobile, its customers, its network, and importantly, its spectrum, must be divested to a party that is committed to service-based competition in all of its forms. Failing that, and only if we have an adequate mandated MVNO regime that enables service-based competition to take hold in the wireless space, the Freedom brand and its customers would need to be divested, but still to a party committed to service-based competition. Canadians need service-based competition. On the internet side, with access to the big companies' wires, we offer innovation, better prices, and better customer service. But the incumbents have been trying to beat us down for years through lawyering and lobbying because we threaten their world-leading returns. Frankly, they're winning that fight because small competitors, despite our innovations, lower prices, and customer service, are a threat to those returns. And we don't get a free ride, and nor have we ever asked for one. We pay for what we use at rates the CRTC designs to compensate the infrastructure owners for the use, plus a markup. With the discussion of the business case challenges building fiber and wireless networks, there's never going to be a business case for a new competitor to step in and build yet another wireless network. So I'll conclude. So how do you preserve competition? The same way we did it for nearly 30 years, through service-based competition, just like in long distance, home phone, and as it was working in internet. But let me ask you this final question. If Canadians want more choice, better price, and better customer service, have these large companies earned the benefit of the doubt? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stein. Notre prochain.
Our next turn will be Jean-Philippe Beek. You have 3 minutes. Thank you. My name is Jean-Philippe Beek, and I am the CEO of eBox, the largest alternative telecommunications company in Quebec. Our company serves more than 90,000 customers in major markets such as Montreal and Toronto, but also in regions where competition has been scarce, such as Abitibi. This is a region where we have seen the devastating effects of the lack of competition. The introduction of Videotron and eBox as service-based competition has reduced retail prices by up to 50%. In fact, eBox was awarded the highest customer satisfaction score of any telecom operator in a Protégez-vous survey. Some of our detractors prefer to call us resellers, but the reality is that we invest proportionately to the size of our company. Tens of millions of dollars in the customer experience, our transport network, data centers, in-house development of a digital TV software, for example. Every day for over 20 years, we've been fighting a battle worthy of David and Goliath, or Asterix and Obelix. There's been a break in the sound. For eBox, there is a fundamental question. How will this transaction serve the interest of Canadians in a market where all but the big players know that Canada is far from being affordable? How can we believe there will be more competition? Shaw is a $5.4 billion company, and it is saying that consolidation is inevitable for it to be able to compete. Videotron, though, is a $4.3 billion company, and it's willing to spend money to be in the same position without an existing wireline subscriber base in Western markets. So this is paradoxical, and it's only helping the current interests of business people. The only real solution is to introduce regulations so that MVNO operators can discipline the market. And with this model, there can be more than 4 players in all markets. Our intention is not to act as parasites in the market, but to address the competition issue. For this to work, there must be restrictions that prevent dominant companies from using their power, for example, by positioning their discount brands to very close to the regulated rate in hopes of stifling competition. To use a famous expression in this committee, it takes one parasite to recognize another. Finally, eBox, like several other companies, has already attempted to become an MVNO on a commercial basis on a number of occasions, but we were unsuccessful, or it was suggested to us that we just consolidate our activities with existing operators. But it's unrealistic to think that serious competition could happen that way.
Monsieur Baillic.
Thank you, Mr. Baik.
Attends 2 secondes parce qu'on a...
Just want to wait a couple of seconds because some of the sound didn't come very well. Mike, I don't know.
Monsieur Baillic's connection.
Yeah, I believe it's a connectivity issue, so there's not much we can do in the room.
Okay,
But,
if IT could perhaps reach out, and we'll go to the next witness. Mayor Wood, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and good morning to the honorable members of the committee. I am grateful for this opportunity to appear before you today regarding the Rogers and Shaw merger. My name is Jim Wood, and I'm Mayor of Red Deer County, located in the heart of central Alberta. Red Deer County is sparsely populated with a landmass of about 2/3 the size of Prince Edward Island. And my opinion towards the merger is this. While it may make financial sense for these companies and their investors, it will probably do nothing to improve the gap between urban and rural internet services. Certainly nothing to improve will improve in Red Deer County. I've talked to people from Rogers and Shaw prior to this meeting, and while their pledge to invest billions of dollars into rural areas will likely expand the internet access footprint, improved services will only happen as profits allow. And often companies choose to service cities and towns only, and this leaves many rural areas with no broadband service at all. And I know that there's no business case serving less than 20,000 people over 4,000 square kilometers returns a profitable investment good enough for telecommunications companies. If there were, my county would already have the same services as Calgary and Edmonton. More competition, not less, is needed to ensure a healthy marketplace. Government financial assistance to develop shared infrastructure and open networks is absolutely necessary. Legislation will also be needed to ensure that telecommunications companies share assets better, they avoid duplication, and reduce costs, creating technological equality for all Canadians. However, my constituents can't wait for this to happen. And that's why Red Deer County has invested millions of our own dollars into an open fiber optic network. We've partnered with a service provider who will be profitable without having exclusive control of the market. We are developing better, faster, and cheaper services than the ones provided by the incumbents in Alberta cities. This do-it-yourself approach is not new. I remember as a boy, my father, a farmer, climbing poles and stringing wire so that our farm could get basic phone services. Times have changed, and our businesses now must compete in a global marketplace. But sadly, the system is broken, and those few companies in Canada's telecommunications industry have no reason to change it. Unfortunately, much of rural Canada has poor internet and cell phone service than many third world countries. Merger or no merger, the impact to my citizens will likely be the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Wood. And next we will go to Ms. Chaban. You have the floor for 3 minutes. You're on mute.
There we go. Thanks for that. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Robin Chaban, and I am the principal economist and co-founder of Vivek Research, an economic consulting firm. I am also a PhD candidate at Carleton University, studying Canadian competition law. The focus of my research is the notion of economic efficiency that has come to be the core philosophy underpinning Canada's competition law. On March 16th, I published an op-ed in the Globe and Mail outlining what I see as a potential outcome of the Competition Bureau's review of this transaction. As you heard from other witnesses, Canada's competition law, the Competition Act, contains a provision that may make it impossible for the Bureau to block this merger, no matter its impact on Canadians. The provision in question is Section 96 of the Act, commonly known as the Efficiencies Defense. This defense allows businesses to merge even if it harms competition and consumers, because it creates cost savings for the business. Under the efficiencies defense, cost savings, often including layoffs, are weighed against the economic inefficiency that comes with higher prices after the merger. For instance, Superior Propane's acquisition of ICG Propane in the 1990s was permitted because of the efficiencies defense, despite being predicted to increase the price of retail propane by about 8%. As a result, the merger created monopolies in 16 communities across Canada. Unlike other jurisdictions, Canada's merger laws are not intended to protect consumers. Again, the Superior Propane case is illustrative. It was calculated that consumers would collectively pay about $40 million more per year due to higher prices. But this number was largely irrelevant because it does not represent an inefficiency according to economic theory. Rogers and Shaw claimed in their press release that the transaction will create $1 billion in synergies or efficiencies per year. If their claim is truthful, then the Bureau may be unable to take any action to protect competition in telecommunications markets. At this point, the only people who can assess the veracity of efficiency claims made by the parties are officers at the Competition Bureau and members of the Competition Tribunal. My intention here today is to provide information and insight into Canada's merger control laws grounded in my academic research. My hope is that committee members walk away with a deeper understanding of competition laws relevant to this transaction, as well as inspiration to reform our competition laws to better serve Canadians. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now start our round of questions. Our first round of 6 minutes will go to MP.
Thank you very much, Madam. Ostensibly, this meeting is to review the recent proposed merger between Rogers and Shaw. We've heard some testimony from several witnesses opposed to the deal, and we've also heard from the companies involved about their commitments to invest in rural broadband networks and the 5G networks in Western Canada. But it certainly seems to me the one perspective we haven't heard from in this study is the rural communities that might most be impacted by the agreement and by rural broadband issues in general. There's a whole host of issues related to access to infrastructure in rural municipalities and what they face. And certainly the local elected officials are on the front line having to deal with this. So I'd like to direct my first question to Mayor Wood. What are some of the challenges rural municipalities face accessing adequate broadband services? And as the mayor of a rural county, what experiences have you had in providing access to broadband services for communities in your area?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to the response to the question. I think one of the key things that we've seen most recently is that with the COVID, it has shown the need for a really, really good broadband system. And, currently right now we have many of our children on and off going to school. They're required to, in fact, be able to learn online. What we're finding is that we have a disparity between the children from the urban centers and the rural centers for the ability to, in fact, even learn at this time. What we're also finding is where many people would be able to work from home, but they're not able to do so because of the lack of the broadband services. Today I drove 80 kilometers to my office. Typically I would have just liked to have been able to have done this testimony from home. I do not have a good enough service at home to anywhere be reliable enough to do this. Now to your second part of your question, what have we done? What we've done is that we've realized that there is just not enough profit involved for any telecommunications company to come in and service our most vast area with a sparse population. But what we did realize that if we can in fact put that backbone, that fiber and some towers into the community, that we could in fact have companies come in and want to in fact service our area. And so I basically look at it as the same as building the first roads in our communities, the same as maybe the first power line that was built by my great grandfather in our area for the rural electrification, where there was no power, or the gas co-op that came in. Is that I think that we need to, as levels of government, provide that service. And I think that if we can in fact do that together, We've taken on a huge bite on this at Red Deer County side. But, I think that if we were able to get a little bit more help from other levels of government, that we could, in fact, set that backbone up, that we could, in fact, have an access where we don't give this to one company or another, that in fact, that we actually can share that road that we all drive on, because we don't need to build a bunch of roads. If we had one good road that I think that everyone had shared access into, that we could, in fact, have a system that would rival none. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Now we know that that Shaw has benefited from the access, to cheap spectrum throughout the set-asides, but has let much of that rural spectrum in Alberta go unused while it's focused its investments in urban areas of the province. I guess the one question is whether the federal government should be imposing a stricter deployment requirement, such as what is considered the use it or lose it license condition, to ensure spectrum is being put to use to connect rural communities. Have you had any experience with Shaw that would indicate their seriousness about connecting rural parts of the riding?
I've seen nothing positive at this point in time, and I wanted to ensure, we did have a brief conversation to find out where they were at. I was not confident that we would see any improvement after that meeting. What we have seen though, is areas where um, when a communications company picks a small town within a region and they don't go beyond that boundary, it limits anyone else to come into the region after that, because I would call it a cherry picking or whatever. They picked the best. They picked the best area and left the other out. Somehow or other, we need to ensure that when companies come into our regions, that they don't just take the gravy and leave the rest. And I think that's extremely important. And that's why we're developing a backbone system that will allow everyone to come in with no restriction. And I think that if we were to take this proposal to all of Canada, that we would in fact now see the competition necessary. I remember back when we a long time ago when we long distance calls were extremely expensive. There was a point in time now then when we were able to actually have many different competition coming, and we watched the cost of long distance drop. And I think that it's extremely important that we have that competition. We need more competition, not less competition.
Thank
I
you.
would also,
Sorry, just the last question before our time is up. Have you been able to access any money from the federal government on its rural broadband fund, and what other experiences have you had being able to source money?
we actually have applications into the federal government from two different programs. We have not heard on our grants back yet. We're very hopeful that we're able to, in fact, see some of this funds. I think that we could show all of Canada what is possible should we be able to get that grant funding. I take a look at it. We're being very bold at this time doing what we're doing.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you so much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Asase. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Allow me to start off by thanking all the witnesses for their very useful testimony. Now, if I could start off with Professor Geist. Thank you for your remarks. I think it's important in particular to highlight your concern that a merger would have adverse impact on competition, in particular in Ontario, Alberta, and BC. Now, I wanted to go to the third recommendation you made, where you touched on the issue of divestiture. If you were holding the pen and you could compel Rogers and Shaw to divest certain assets, what would those assets be?
Thanks for the question, and thanks again for the invitation. I think the starting point is to recognize the wireless assets have to go. And one can understand why there may still be significant value for those two companies on the cable side, and of course the kind of competition that exists, given, as Professor Winsek noted, a divided up market dating back now decades, has less implications, it seems to me, for the everyday consumer, although it may have some broader market impact. But on the wireless side, the impact is obvious. And so full divestiture of the wireless assets to find some mechanism to maintain at least the prospect of a fourth national player, I think has to be the starting point.
Thank you for that. Now, my second question for you is your second recommendation touched very much on the failings of the CRTC. I was wondering, after the Governor and Council order in 2019, where the CRTC was ordered to consider consumer interests, do you think that's going to make a difference? Is that going to be sufficient to compel CRTC to really put that at the center of their consideration of this merger?
Well, I wish I could say the answer is yes, but I have significant doubts, to be candid. I don't believe, and with all respect to current chair of the CRTC, that what we've seen over the last number of years is a prioritization of consumers, and I identified several examples of how that is. I think the GIC that we saw go back also, I mean, certainly referenced consumers, but it referenced other factors as well. And I have some concerns that the way the CRTC is going to interpret that is not to put consumers at the center of its policy, in the same way that it hasn't put consumers at the center of its policy on a number of different issues, including even ones that were designed specifically to address consumer concerns.
Thank you for that. Now, if I could turn to Mr. Stein. Mr. Stein, in your testimony, you talked about the spectrum licensing process. Similarly, if you were holding the pen on that process, what would your recommendation be?
Specifically regarding spectrum licensing or regarding this merger?
With respect to spectrum licensing as it implicates this merger.
Well, my comments in my opening were about the merger itself. And what I was saying was, with respect to this merger, the only way that this can go ahead while still protecting what was set up and what was intended by the spectrum licensing was for freedom, its customers, its network, and most importantly, its spectrum to be divested before this merger were to be allowed to go ahead.
Okay, and in your opinion, the prerogative already exists to actually do that?
Yes, the Competition Bureau could do that, et cetera. Yes, absolutely.
But I'm just talking about the spectrum, the approach to spectrum licensing.
My colleague Jeff White, I think, was trying to get a comment in there. Jeff, you want to go ahead?
Sure. There seems to be a lot of focus at this committee about what tools we have and what measures could be imposed. Let's be clear. Competition Bureau has all the remedies it has and needs to deliver the right outcome for Canadians here. So does the CRTC. They don't need new tools. They have plenty of tools, and so does the Competition Bureau. And the policy direction that you asked Professor Geist about speaks to competition, affordability, consumer.
I understand that, Mr. White, but as you know, one of the processes is ICID, which obviously has a say insofar as the spectrum policy is concerned. So with respect to ICID, would you have any specific recommendations?
The biggest tool in the government's is with the CRTC at the moment in terms of opening up access to the airwaves of Rogers and Shaw to make this to bring more competition to consumers. That's the quickest, easiest solution if this merger goes ahead. But as I think you're hearing, a loud consensus that this deal should not go ahead.
Okay. And then with respect to the three processes, what do you think the essential timelines will be?
The regulators aren't sharing their timelines with these. I think we should not be in a hurry to approve this deal. We should be, the first thing we'd like to see as service-based competitors is the CRTC to come out with a decision on mobile virtual network operators, because that's the quickest, easiest remedy, and it's already within the regulator's power.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you very much.
We'll now go to MP Lemire. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question will be for Mr. Bake from eBox. You said that you tried to become an MVNO. Could you talk about that experience, please? Thank you for that question, Mr. Lemire. I will be pleased to talk a little bit about that experience. Some details are confidential, though, so I'll have to be a little bit careful. As I said in my opening remarks, we tried a number of times to become an MVNO in the past, but unfortunately, we always came up against obstacles in reaching an agreement. And one of the proposals to us was to launch a brand that would be controlled by one of the big players. So if you wanted to try to position yourself, you would have to work that way with the established big players, and that created obstacles. Yes, our experience was, and I think this is true of other operators that we have talked to, was that it was impossible to have a commercial agreement. And the only way forward was really to have an agreement to work with the company. So that doesn't exactly promote competition or help your kind of company. Yes. So when it comes to the reviews that would be done by the Competition Bureau, the CRTC, and so on, what are your thoughts about that? What we think is that introducing service-based competition is absolutely essential so that once and for all we can deal with the competition issue in Canada. The fact that consolidation in the market has taken place among the big players will continue to affect the market in the future. The introduction of MVNOs into the market is the only way that we can have viable competition for all Canadians and to have affordable prices. We know that Rogers and Shaw are saying that competition will actually be encouraged in the region affected and that there will be better access for rural and Indigenous Canadians. What do you think about those promises? What do you think should be the priority? Should it be that or the introduction of fiber? Well, we don't have any 5G ourselves because we weren't able to become an MVNO, so we can't offer that service. I think that 5G is a natural next step for the technology, like high speed and various other innovations that we've seen. So it's necessary, absolutely. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes.
His company is a member of CNOC, so I was just hoping if I could just add to that. 5G isn't going to help Mayor Wood and his constituents. And the real discussion right now is 4G and internet to the home. I mean, we can't seem to get that right, despite the regulator having all the tools it needs to make that happen. And we're talking about 5G. 5G isn't the issue right now. It's 4G. We've got to get that right before we can even think about something in the future that at the rate it's going will just fall into the hands of the big companies. The solutions are there today.
Thanks very much. I have a lot of sympathy for the situation faced by Mayor Woods and his community. We do have a lot of confidence in online technology for the future, but this is difficulty. So how do things work for a company that wants to become a fourth or fifth competitor? Could you tell us a little bit about the process? For example, procuring cable, rather fiber, and trying to compete with somebody like Rogers. How does that work? Well, I think you're referring to the situation that we are seeing right now, that is the having access to the network capability, and there have to be regulatory decisions on that will favor competition and make it viable. So that's the most important thing right now. But what are the major aspects that can make competition viable? Well, the major factors would be to have the right regulations and that they be respected by the various players, right? I'm sorry? Thank you, Madam Chair. My time's up. Thank you very much, Mr. Lemire.
Questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses, and thank you for the quick 3 minutes. That was my idea to get a lot of witnesses in here, so you can blame me. But I'm also reached the conclusion early in this discussion that eliminating any one of the four players is not good public policy. In fact, I have the unenviable, I guess the point here of defending the Titanic in terms of the current system, because all I can see is it getting worse by what's taking place here. I'm going to go with my first question to Mr. Geis. I'm a little bit concerned about how we would almost like be gerrymandering the assets of Shaw here with peeling off Freedom Mobile and then expecting it to be a winner in the market. It seems like a big gamble for me, as opposed to where it currently resides. It has a couple of different ways and revenue streams. And if we just kind of siphoned off one part of it, I don't know what would be left, and it just seems like a bad approach, in my opinion, to trying to provide more competition.
I started with the recommendation that this not go ahead, and I think you're right that, best case, quite frankly, if our concern is competition, if our concern is ensuring a viable fourth player in all markets, and preferably even a national player, that frankly this merger simply wouldn't go through. We see from the perspective of many consumers, bundled type offerings where there's an expectation that they're going to buy more than just a wireless service, they'll buy multiple services, is a pretty accepted part for a lot of consumers. And peeling it off into a wireless only play, and a smaller play at that point in time, presents some significant challenges in the marketplace. I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, I guess the notion of full divestiture is, if this does go ahead, then the question was, well, what do we do? And that seemed to me the best available approach, but I don't disagree. I think it still leaves us with a setback with respect to competition in Canada.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shaban, with regards to the efficiencies offense, you brought that out, and I disagree with, there's a lot of great people at the Competition Bureau. I think we have a good skill set of people there, and that, but I don't think it has the proper tools to actually really defend consumers in a modern economy. We've only tweaked it here. I've been around for a while, and we've only tweaked it recently, and it wasn't very strong. What other countries have an efficiency defense? Because I think that's an important part of the conversation that gets skimmed over.
Yeah, for sure. I want to reiterate that it is incorrect to assume that the Competition Bureau has the tools it needs to act in the best interests of Canadian consumers. And when it comes to the efficiencies defense, Canada is, by my understanding, the only OECD economy that has an efficiencies defense like this. I did a review of a database of competition laws across the globe for the last 2 centuries. And there's only a handful of other countries that have a provision like this. Mauritius, Malta, Barbados, and they're small economies that are trying to develop this provision so that their businesses can scale up and compete on the international scale. That's my assumption.
So it can be played almost like an excuse to go ahead despite actually going against the principles of reviewing it and protecting competition. It just becomes kind of like a card to be played and go ahead regardless of the consequences.
Yeah, exactly. It is a defense in the sense that it allows businesses to engage in harmful mergers if there is sufficient economies of scale arising from that merger. And the problem, in my view, with this mechanism is that it puts the burden on consumers. So we give these businesses a free pass to undermine competition with the hope that, maybe they will be able to better compete internationally, but it's consumers that are paying the price for that. And it raises the question of politics and just the political nature of competition policy, which I think gets swept under the rug when it comes to Canadian conversations.
I agree with that for sure. Over quickly to Mr. Weinsek. With regards to this whole issue over profitability, you had an interesting graph that you have here with regards to the amount of money that's being made, ranking Canada 8th. I mean, we often hear the excuse that we can't reach, places like Mr. Wood there, and we've, taken in over 20 to 25 billion, depending upon how you want to, add up the spectrum auctions over the last number of decades. And then you're showing us that there's quite a bit of profit margin in there. We just seem kind of complacent to allow the companies to, they're making a profit even during COVID-19. They're doing quite well. But they can't afford, aside from massive public subsidies, to actually take a loss anywhere else in their business plan. Seems kind of an absurd proposition to accept, especially since we're sheltering them from foreign competition. You're on mute, Mr. Vice.
All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, they've maintained extremely lucrative profit margins in the 30 to 40% range, which is 3 to 4 times the average of Canadian industry as a whole. And I think, this idea that we have the 8th largest market, I mean, I was stunned when I gathered this data up over the week. And I think it speaks directly to Robin Chaban's point, about, the efficiency defense may be fine in a small market, but we have the 8th largest market in the world. And what we see is that, when it comes to investing in the towers that are necessary to bring service across the country, our big carriers fare very poorly. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now start our second round of questions. Our first 5-minute round goes to Député Généreux. Vous avez 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes, Mr. Généreux. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Ms. Chaban, Barbados can hardly be compared with Canada. So could you explain that, please?
Can you expand on what sort of explanation you're looking for?
Well, the difference between Canada and Barbados is great. What we have heard from witnesses, Rogers and Shaw, explained that Canada is a huge country and required huge investments because our density is very low. So we have to take that into account in our analysis when we compare Canada with other countries around the world. We have to look at the density, because if we look at European countries like France and Belgium and others, well, we have to look at the size of our geography, and that requires enormous investments. So when Rogers tells us that they need to make this acquisition so that they can invest more, well, do you not think that makes sense, economically speaking?
I understand your question. I think that this comes back to the previous point I made about what is the most appropriate way to support businesses in achieving that scale. Is it acceptable for us to allow businesses to merge in order to achieve the scale they need to, say, cover Canada with telecommunications infrastructure, or compete internationally on the world stage, by allowing them to essentially exploit consumers and reduce competition domestically? The funny thing about the efficiency, it privileges businesses that have these expensive, expansive infrastructures. So the number one user of the efficiencies defense historically has been Superior Propane, which is the company I talked about in my opening remarks. They operate a propane distribution network, and they have successfully used the efficiencies defense 3 times. 2 of those times, they were permitted to create monopolies, full-blown monopolies, in several communities across Canada. So there's a trade-off. If we choose to create a mechanism like the efficiencies defense to achieve scale, I think that scale is important. And if Shaw and Rogers are committed to expanding their networks to serve rural Canadians, I think that's good and important. But I question whether this tool is the right approach, in part because it cripples the competition ability to protect consumers. And I think that's really the core of the public outrage that we're seeing with respect to this merger.
Thank you. Mr. Stein and White, do you agree with that assumption?
Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. I'm happy to talk about the population density argument and all of these arguments and explain why they're distractions from the main issue of the day and the main issue that should be before this committee and the main issue you should be focusing in on when you speak to the CRTC and the Competition Bureau. Because I don't think competition law is really where we need to be looking right now. Yes, there is this awful efficiencies defense. Yes, it's in our law right now. If you try to fix the law to try to shut down this merger, I anticipate years of challenges. The CRTC currently has what it needs to address the rural broadband problem for Mayor and his constituents. It has what it needs to address. It has what it needs to address Canadians in urban settings who know the highest rates in the world and to have terrible customer service to the point of.
Why is that? Why is that? Can you explain that?
Because there's a fundamental lack of competition. The big 3 wireless carriers compete upwards. They don't compete downwards on price. It's innovators like the members of CNOC and eBox that compete.
All right, thanks.
Merci beaucoup. Our next round of questions goes to MP Erskine Smith. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I want to start, Professor Winsick. We heard from Professor Geist that, in his view, this ought to not go through, and you took the same view. Mr. Geist also then said, if it were to go through, there needs to be a divestment of all wireless assets. Would you agree with that? Should there ought there to be other conditions over and above that?
Yeah, I think I'd really insist on holding the line at this deal should not go through. And I think the reasons for that are twofold. One, I think, trying to create an imaginary new 4th competitor to replace one that's already existing, I think is a fool's errand. We've already seen that with the Bell MTS deal, and the 4th competitor just hasn't got off the ground, and it's been a complete failure, and I'm referring to ExploreNet here. Second, when we looked at the United States, they were faced with a similar merger in 2011 when AT&T, the number 1 or 2 provider, went for T-Mobile at the time. And the Department of Justice there said no. And what happened immediately afterwards? T-Mobile doubled down on its Maverick strategy. It doubled down on its Maverick strategy by offering more affordable pricing plans, by much more generous data allowances, and by doing something completely unheard of, but that would be certainly welcome in Canada, offering roam like home deals to T-Mobile subscribers that allowed them to roam in over 100 countries around the world without any extra bolt-on $10 or $15 a day if you go to the U.S. or
Can
Europe
you pause there
or
in relation to the U.S.? Mr. Geist also said that we should be open to foreign ownership, and if Shaw is of the view that it doesn't want to continue to operate Freedom, let's say this transaction is canceled or a spinoff is required, should we be open to American companies coming into Canada to help operate in this space?
Yes, I believe we should. We have some of the most restrictive foreign ownership rules in the world. The last time I checked on this, South Korea was the only country in the OECD that had more restrictive rules than Canada. The thing is, we've been here before. We've seen this plot line before, and this plot line does not necessarily translate into reality. We saw this in the great wireless wars of 2013, where Verizon was seen as the potential white knight just over the 49th parallel. It kicked the tires, it didn't come. All right. So we should, I think double down on Shaw pushing ahead. It doesn't have to get what it wants all the time.
And Mr. Geist, spoken also about the need for MVNOs. I agree. I wonder what you think about the Competition Bureau's view. In a submission to the CRTC, they emphasized the need for greater competition, emphasized a role for MVNOs, but it was almost like a very targeted role to better facilitate or better create and allow for facilities-based competitors to get a foothold and to really grow facilities-based competition, pointing to Eastlink and Freedom in particular. Do you think MVNOs should be used in such a targeted way or should be used more expansively?
I think there's room to be more expansive. When I mentioned in my opening remarks sort of the half measures, this I think the approach we've seen on MVNOs is reflective of that, where the starting position, of course, was no, because there's this tendency seemingly never to allow for these new forms of competition. Once we started to see continually the experience of the high pricing in Canada, there was at least an acknowledgement that perhaps this might offer up some possibility. But again, doing so in a slow way, and we see that coming out of the regulator, and we saw CC as well. This is a debate that's been ongoing now for so many years, and it seems pretty clear that what we've done to date hasn't worked, and we need to be far more aggressive from a policy perspective.
Can I ask on that, the debate going on for years, you follow this debate certainly more than I have, and when we look at MVNOs delivering lower prices, that certainly to me matters a great deal. The biggest digital divide is one on income in this country. You'll hear my 4-year-old in the background. I apologize. When it comes to the other digital divide, though, the one that Mr. Wood is most concerned about, and rightfully concerned, we want companies to build. And there is, and the Competition Bureau notes this, the CRTC's noted this, there is a challenge here. We're competing interests. The more we allow MVNOs, potentially the big three tell us, well, we're not going to build as much. Has there been any conversation in this space about where companies build that for a certain period of time, they have a monopoly over that build, but then it is opened up after a period? In other legal spaces, we have this framework. Has this been part of the debate?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's been a recognition that the companies, given a choice, double down on the urban areas where they're already serving, as opposed to going to the rural and remote communities. And so they seem to almost hold out for these kinds of situations. We saw it in Manitoba. We're seeing it now, to hold out the kind of goodies to say, hey, if only you approve this, then we'll really go ahead into these communities. It has that policy, that strategy hasn't worked. And I think my view is that it's really been the role of governments to do a better job of saying we've got to invest in these communities if the companies aren't willing to do so, and use a more open approach as part of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Geist. Our next round goes to Député Lemire. Vous avez 2 minutes.
MP Lemire, you have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question will be for Mr. Klaas from the Canadian Media Concentration Research Project. We understand that 95% of the consumer payments go to the major three, and now after the merger, there will be 97% in the hands of Roger in certain areas. Can you comment on that?
Yes. So any market share that's going to the smaller companies is essentially the result of the government policy to bring in a fourth carrier in all regions of Canada, which began in about 2007. A number of those companies that entered the market in 2008, 2009, such as Mr. Stein mentioned, Wind Mobile, which is now Freedom Mobile owned by Shaw, a number of them have sort of failed and been consolidated. And what we're left with is Freedom, Videotron in Quebec, Eastlink in the Maritime provinces. And so basically, any of the gains and any of the competition we've seen has been a result of the sustained policy that's been required to bring in these competitors. If this merger is allowed, it would be tantamount to the government's admission that they're no longer interested in supporting real competition in this space. And so I think that is why Dr. Winsek and myself are really behind the idea that this merger should not be allowed to proceed. We've started to see these competitors getting over a threshold where they can have a serious effect on prices across the board, not just the lower prices they offer themselves, but by having an impact on the existing larger providers, forcing them to respond. And so if even if, which I think is a very big if, someone else was found that could viably run the wireless assets if they were divested, which I very much doubt, we would be starting from square one. And this is, it's like Groundhog Day all over again. Canada's mobile wireless market has gone through this, these attempts by policymakers to introduce competition in the 90s, in the early 2000s, and finally now we've got a situation where these regional competitors are starting to take hold and have a real impact. So, I mean, I think you can see, you're saying the market share may go for Rogers up to 90%, over 90% in some places. Well, there is, that's what we're going to get here. We're going to get just the large companies left in much of the country with no real aid in sight.
Yes. Thank you. Our next round of questions goes to MP Massey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Geist again, you mentioned the CRTC and policy. I mean, the CRTC is, they're really good at making sausages, it appears. I'm just not sure that's what we need. We need, so do they need like a directive letter from the minister, or is that what you're suggesting is a policy change with the CRTC? What would be your advice to give it more direction? I mean, we just seem to get, like, sometimes they get, it's almost like they'll stick their toe in the water on certain things, but then they just get cold feet at the end of the day and don't go the full distance for consumers.
It does feel that way. I think we had a brief period under the former chair, Jean-Pierre Blais, where there was a pretty consistent effort to put consumers at the center. I think that has respectfully changed under the current chair. And as I mentioned, I highlighted a number of ways to do that. We can try, we've already had policy directions that hasn't worked as effectively. I think the government can send signals, certainly to the regulator, and take a strong stand where it doesn't get the kind of outcome that it's seeking, where the law allows for that. But I mean, I don't know that there are at the point in time, given the shift that we've seen, and this initially a more subtle one, and now I think a bit of a more obvious one. And this cuts across not just these issues we're talking about. We're seeing it on the broadcast side as well, where there is a draft policy direction to the CRTC on a forthcoming bill, although it doesn't say very much.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Kloss, with regards to the public investment, with regards to the spectrum auction, and also even just infrastructure, should we be putting more conditions and terms on those facilities that we invest on? I seem right now we have a companies what they can get to work, and we have a municipality here as a good example applying. Should there be more structure provided if there is going to be public assets as partnerships?
Absolutely. And I think that the design of those types of policies is crucial. We saw when the new entrants came in 2007, again, conditions attached that required companies to offer roaming and tower sharing at commercial rates. That was enough. Spent a decade at the CRTC coming up with rates and terms that the companies will have to abide by in offering those types of things. So I think to the extent that we can structure the infrastructure arrangements towards sharing and towards efficient deployment of infrastructure that's available to all competitors, the better outcomes we're going to see for consumers and for the industry as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Polyev. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Geist. Dr. Geist, you said that in the event that this merger goes ahead, that the wireless assets of Shaw would have to be spun off, and that there would need to be policy changes to invite more foreign competition into the Canadian marketplace. Could you describe mechanically what you mean by that? What would be, if you had to write out kind of an IKEA instruction manual for us, what would it say?
Well, let's focus on the foreign ownership issue, and I think Professor Winsek rightly noted that we've seen this movie before, and it doesn't end well. And certainly the Verizon experience is suggestive of that. I think the starting point, quite frankly, is to remove really all barriers, open the market up to foreign entrants. I'm not sure that that's going to result in a fundamental change. Many of the, when Verizon, as Dwayne said, kicked the tires on Canada, they saw enormous opposition from the big three and just decided Canada wasn't worth their while. There were other places where they could make money without having to fight three large incumbents. But opening up the market fully so that a company could think about entering in potentially not just with those assets, but potentially some of the larger assets as well, might provide at least someone with the perspective that this is an attractive enough market. And from a consumer perspective, bringing in that kind of pricing power, that sort of roaming ability on a global level, opens the door, I think, to opportunities that Canadians don't experience, but consumers in many other countries do.
What regulatory changes would that opening up require?
Remove the well, it would in this situation, it would certainly require removing any sort of cap, which we have right now. You can grow into a larger foreign-owned entity, but you can't take over a Canadian entity above a certain threshold. We could remove those thresholds. We would also have to think about whether or not we want to maintain the current restrictions on broadcast ownership, because of course we've seen some of the largest companies also own large broadcast assets. And while the Bill C-10 actually does remove some of the references to Canadian ownership, so in some way the government may be already moving a little bit in that direction, perhaps inadvertently. That's certainly, I think, part of the equation, and perhaps it's part of a broader discussion as to our comfort level with foreign ownership of broadcast assets. But if the issue or the concern comes around airing Canadian content and some other regulatory obligations, I honestly don't see why those couldn't apply to foreign-owned companies in the same way as they apply to Canadian-owned ones.
Right. Now, what would had if the condition for approval were that all overlapping services of Rogers and Shaw be spun off?
I think that's the most palatable answer, absent, not absent saying no to the merger altogether. And I think, there are good reasons for still saying no. Shaw is a viable, innovative competitor, as we've already heard, and so taking them out of the market in this space is, I think, a loss ultimately for consumers. But if for legal reasons or other reasons the decision is made that it's going to go ahead, that is the best available alternative.
But what would be the advantage? Like, what would be? You seem to say that even if the wireless and other overlapping services are spun off, the merger still would be a net negative. Why is that? Why why exactly would that be the negative? Again, if you're removing freedom and other assets that for which there is competition, you're giving it to some other third provider through an auction or something. Why wouldn't that be just as good?
Well, then I suppose it comes down. I think you're injecting a fair amount of uncertainty into the marketplace, as we have to sort of know the who really matters in this case. If it's a who that's comparable to a Shaw that can offer up some of the bundled services, can compete economically with some of the larger players, and so that it's a fairly seamless transition, well, then the response might be that's about as good as we're going to get, and there probably isn't. There are fewer negative implications. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, if it's just another standalone player, harkening back to the days of Wind, I think that is a setback because these assets are stronger in the marketplace from a competitive perspective with a stronger player behind them.
Do I have any more time left, Madam Chair?
17 seconds.
All right. Do you see any prospect for alternative technologies to replace what we have now, as opposed to just changing the regulatory model?
I think technology is always going to continue to adapt, and we'll see satellite and some other players come into the marketplace. But at its heart, for so many consumers for the foreseeable future, these wireless assets are absolutely essential from a communications perspective.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Jacek. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. As the Member of Parliament for Markham-Stouffville, my primary concern is that my constituents have access to high-speed internet at an affordable price. And for the last 3 of these sessions, I do not see any upside for my constituents for the acquisition of Shaw by Rogers. However, as a member of this committee, we have a responsibility to make recommendations at the end of this study. And we have heard a number of potential changes to the mandate of the CRTC, to some of the issues related to the Competition Bureau. So I would like to start with Ms. Shaban. You have, of course, told us about the efficiencies defense and your feeling that Rogers may very well use this defense and may, in fact, be successful in having the Competition Bureau being unable to refuse this particular merger. Is there anything in that efficiencies defense that you would like to see retained? I'm assuming that you would like to see it removed completely. But could you speak a little bit about what was the purpose originally, and are there any elements that might need to be retained?
Right. So the original purpose of the efficiencies defense was to allow businesses the opportunity to achieve scale so that they could better compete internationally. That's kind of the more superficial rationale. The layer below that is that the efficiencies defense exists because decades earlier in the 1960s, there was a fundamental shift in how scholars and legal experts understood the role of competition policy. And this shift was away from the original understandings of antitrust in the United States, from a more consumer focused economic fairness and justice lens to one that focuses exclusively on efficiency. And I think it's important to have efficiency as part of the mandate of competition policy. And so in that sense, I think it would make sense to retain some of that, that goal in any revisions to the Competition Act. I think the problem with the efficiencies defense is its very structure and the way it forces the Competition Bureau and the Competition Tribunal to assess efficiencies. It pits consumer interests against those of businesses and gives preferences to businesses. And I think in this, as our economy evolves and we move towards a more digital age, the philosophy underpinning the efficiencies defense isn't really that relevant. And I'm not sure whether the efficiencies defense has actually achieved what it set out to do. Again, the number one user of the efficiencies defense has been Superior Propane. And I'd be interested to know whether Superior Propane has actually become a Canadian champion in the global sphere. There's a lot of research that we need to be doing on the effectiveness of our competition policies, and we actually don't have the tools to do that compared to other jurisdictions. So I think to answer your question just directly, I think that the efficiencies defense as it is, Section 96, it has to go. Maybe there is a way to imbue the act with a frame of efficiency, but the way that that provision is structured, it's not conducive to create equitable outcomes.
Thank you. Now, Professor Geist, you surprised me considerably when you said that under the current chair, the emphasis at the CRTC seems to have changed. And I'm wondering, surely the chair has a very clear-cut mandate, or is it in reaction to some sort of policy directives that the chair has received? I'm surprised that there's a lack of clarity as to the direction of the CRTC. So could you kind of address how the CRTC's mandate is structured that allows for some flexibility?
Sure. Well, I mean, quickly with 30 seconds, I think I'd start by noting that there have been governments have provided in their essentially a mandate letter to CRTC chairs. We had that with Jean-Pierre Blais, for example, so that there is some effort at times from governments to try to provide some guidance for what they expect to see. But I guess more fundamentally, I think every chair takes on the position with certain goals in mind. Sometimes they're well articulated, sometimes not. Sometimes we'll get a speech where we'll see what some of the priorities are. My view would be that under Blais, we saw a really strong emphasis about consumers being at the center of the communication system, both broadcast and telecom. And we've seen a shift away from that under the current chair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next witness is MP. Our next round goes to MP Baldinelli. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. Earlier on in the hearings, when we were hearing, listened to both Rogers and Shaw make their presentations, just from my notes, I mean, some of the quotes that I had taken down, I believe from Mr. Natali, economy and the country are at a turning point. We need scale to do the investments and connectivity that is required. And later on, they also, I'm not sure if it was Mr. Shaw or Mr. Natali, talked about 5G was at the heart of everything we will do. And again, use that notion of scale matters. In listening to Mr. Klass and Mr. Winzik, I saw your one slide that talked about the bigger is not better, faster or more innovative. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that notion of, you know, Shaw and Rogers had talked about a $2.5 billion investment in the 5G network and then about a $6 billion investment in Western Canada. But is scale as important as the competition? Mr. Winzik or Klass?
Sure. I'll take an initial stab and then I'll turn it over to Ben. So I think these are not things that we have to trade off against one another. I think what we've seen is that the companies like Eastlink, Videotron, and Shaw have significant scale to make the capital investments in the new fiber and new generations of technology that we need. And they have done so, and they have carved out significant market shares. And as I note in the kind of background data for my presentation today, or Ben and I's presentation, you know, when you look at it, Shaw spends proportionately more of its revenue, something that the industry calls capital expenditure intensity, than Rogers does. Is burdened with debt as Rogers is, and Rogers faces significant new costs coming over the horizon with this spectrum auction for 3,500 that's essential to 5G, the Hockey Night in Canada stuff. And if this deal comes through, it is going to be so over leveraged, one has to wonder about its ability to make these debts or make these investments. Last point I would say on this point is, you know, they can promise the moon, but once this deal goes through, how are you going to verify anything? How are you going to hold their feet to the fire if they don't make the investments that they say? Ben?
Yeah, and I'll just add, a lot of it turns on a sort of a decision about what sort of an economy and a society we want to have. Do we want to have large, powerful champions that we hand a tremendous amount of power and then put a lot of trust into? Or would we prefer to see a more decentralized, competitive environment that is operating according to the sort of pressures exerted by a marketplace? This is something that's relevant, I think, in the context of this discussion about the efficiencies defense, because Rogers is presenting this. Oh, we're going to spend X billion dollars. You know, Mr. Natali confirmed in front of this committee that that would be new investment, but they're presenting this the counterfactual, the status quo, each company going on its own, as if it's the only alternative. Right. So we heard from Dr. Winczek that when AT&T was not allowed to take over T-Mobile, T-Mobile shifted its strategy and became more innovative. In Canada, we have an example in Bell and Rogers network sharing agreement that demonstrates that a company doesn't need to merge to be able to provide world-class telecommunication service. So Bell and Telus collectively share a network, and they've had this agreement in place since 2001. It's explicitly designed so that neither company has to put the capital outlay out that would be required to cover the entire country with mobile networks, but that both of them are able to offer service. Right? It's a way of achieving efficiencies and scale without the attendant problems of creating a corporate hyper giant that would be from coast to coast in control of everything. Right? So what you see is that there are alternatives, and if you say no to Rogers, even if they don't invest, Rogers and Shaw, for instance, could enter into such an agreement and come to the same outcome without the problems.
And just a quick question, if allowed to stand without any conditions or stipulations, would there not be a fear that there could be some further consolidation which takes place in the sector as opposed to more entrants and more competition?
Certainly, there have been rumors for years regarding this merger, but I would point to SaskTel, which I'm sure TELUS is looking at, you know, very anxiously. an example of a company that has done very well in rolling out rural networks. And so I think this would open the doors to further consolidation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Johari. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony today. Let me start with Ms. Chabon. So much talk has been done about efficiency defense. I understand that that defense could be used as it relates to gaining economy of scale as well as cost saving, with the purpose of being able to remain competitive internationally. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
Okay, thank you for that. So, in your opinion, when Rogers and Shaw merge, what international competition are trying to, fend off? And is this clause really relevant to this merger?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that as I was preparing for this committee. And I think I personally would feel more comfortable with the efficiencies defense if it applied to firms that had a real intention to engage in international commerce, that were trying to scale up in Canada so that they could perform on the world stage. It's not clear to me how or if Shaw and Rogers are planning to do this. And like I mentioned before, it's not clear how some of the other firms that have benefited from this defense have leveraged that opportunity to increase Canada's competitiveness internationally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we have restriction around foreign investment coming in, therefore, do we really have an international international competition that we are trying to fend off if that restriction is there?
I think it's less about fending off and more about giving businesses the opportunity that they can engage outside of Canada. I think that better reflects the intention. I think it would be what you're describing sounds like a negative consequence of the efficiencies defense, where when we let businesses in Canada get really big, it's then difficult for international competitors to enter Canadian markets and provide that competitive rivalry we need in order to keep prices low, promote innovation. So yeah, I think that what you're describing there is a negative consequence of the efficiencies defense.
Yeah, thank you. So in a sense, if we open up the competition and allowed foreign international, for example, some U.S. company that's come in and, for example, invest in Shaw and help Shaw even enlarges its footprint across Canada. Therefore, not only remaining as a fourth, player, but also expanding its, service ranges as well as. Is that something that we should consider?
Yeah, and I think that the efficiencies defense works against that plan because it allows businesses in Canada to get bigger than they otherwise would. And it gives them a dominant position in the market, which they can then use to protect their dominance. So the Verizon example is really illustrative, where Verizon contemplated entering Canada and it hadn't entered yet, but the telcos responded to this announcement by lowering prices. And it's not like they lowered prices because consumers had options. They were lowering prices, in my view, because they were trying to signal to Verizon that if they entered, there'd be a fight and it would be less profitable for them to do so. And part of the problem of concentration in the telecommunications sector is that it allows.
Sorry, if I apologize for interrupting you. I got about a minute left, and I really like to go to Mr. White. Mr. White, you suggested that between the Competition Bureau and CRTC, they really have all they need. And you specifically, if I understand it correctly, you specifically said, really, this is not about the Competition Bureau. It's about CRTC, and CRTC, it has what it needs. And can you expand on what you specifically meant CRTC has it, what it needs? And what is that need?
Thank you, and thank you for the question. This is a great discussion. I think it's important that you hear from the small competitors who are here willing to serve Canadians. With respect, certainly there's a competition issue here. Certainly this has to go through the Bureau for approval. Certainly there's an issue with the efficiencies defense. You haven't heard one positive thing about it from anyone, from the consumer groups, from Ms. Chaban.
Sorry about that. Perhaps you'll be able to pick it up on the next round. Our next round of questions goes to Deputy Lemire.
MP Lemire. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question will be for Mr. Stein and Mr. White. On March 29th, we heard about the important role played by Shaw in becoming the fourth player and the agreement on roaming. And the sharing of towers among competitors. Do you think that there are other conditions that should be brought in to help fourth, fifth, and sixth competitors and help people get into the market?
I'll make a quick comment. So first, it's important to understand that Shaw, with Freedom, before it was Freedom, it was Wind. And Wind itself, I referred to earlier as the instigator. They were an instigator of competition. They weren't a vertically integrated, well-moneyed company who had many other assets and many other types of business in the same region. They were an instigator. They were scrappy. They were trying to find ways to compete into a tough market. It's that behavior that Canadians need. What they've had under the time of Shaw has been a very weakened version of that. And you can see many examples of how Shaw, over their time owning Wind, has adapted it and modified it, and it's become far more like the big incumbents that we're referring to here. So that's important to understand, first of all. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to elaborate further.
I feel like we need a CrossFit clock here so I can watch the time countdown. Okay, Monsieur Lemire, the fourth player model is clearly broken. We need a full, open, wholesale access model. The CRTC currently has the tools for it, Mr. Jari. And you said, where do we look for this? You look to Section 7 of the Telecommunications Act, which says telecommunications policy of Canada is to respond to the social and economic needs of users. You look at Section 24 of the Act, which says that the rates charged by Canadian carriers should be just and reasonable. You look at the CRTC's recent consultation on mobile virtual network operators, and you send a strong political message to the CRTC to do something about this problem. Yes, the efficiencies defense is going to be a problem in terms of this merger may go forward from a competition bureau perspective, but the CRTC regulates this industry and has clear policy directions. It just needs the government to stand behind it when it does make a decision.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to Minister White to finish that intervention. That was good. An idea specifically. Ms. Chaban, Rogers made a play on Cogeco earlier this year. We went out strong against it, as I did anyways, because I was concerned about the precedent it could set. It was a hostile takeover and it fell apart. And then the spectrum auctions coming up right now was delayed by 6 months. And this clearly has a significant impact on the spectrum auction. It'll have an impact on the amount of customers for the auction. It'll have an impact upon how, if there's set-asides and policy for it. Should the spectrum auction now be held off? Do you have an opinion on that? I'm looking for some direction about that, or should it be extended? Or because if Shaw doesn't bid, then we say no, and then later on they're out of the market for this auction, and that's not a good sign.
Yeah, that's an intriguing question. I don't have an informed view on that.
Okay. Does anybody else want to, Mr. White or Mr. Stein or Mr. Jean-Philippe there? I know you want to in on that. You're going to be affected by that. I don't know if you want to comment or not, but the floor is yours if you do.
The problem of high prices, a lack of competition, even the problem of how to better serve Mayor Wood's constituents really is solved by service-based competition. It's the reason we have competition. We had it for long distance. We had it for home phone. We had for a period of years a workable model at home on home internet. We pay the incumbents to use their facilities. We pay them a markup as well. You apply this to on the wireless side of things, there will be a win for Canadians.
So hold off on the spectrum or not. So that's kind of what I was kind of looking for. I only got 30 seconds.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
Mr. White.
I will
Absolutely.
say yes. Yeah, hold.
Okay. Thanks. I know I took a few seconds. I'm going to I'll send it back to you. Thank you to the witnesses.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Dreeshen. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thanks again. And I just wanted to make one comment. It was mentioned earlier that rural communities just be happy to get good 3G. I agree that's important, but the agricultural industry, 5G is important to them, and hopefully this isn't forgotten as we look to the future. And certainly municipalities have a great deal of things that they have to deal with, and laying fiber, putting up towers, all of these things are issues as they go through everyone's community. To Mayor Wood, has there been any backlash when these projects have been proposed and go through the approval process?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. Actually, we've seen the exact opposite. It's been very, very welcoming from our community to just understand that we have something really good coming. And of course, we're still in our initial stages, but I can talk about some partnerships. We partnered with some of our small towns as well. And what's happened through that is that they've now been able to, in fact, see the level of service. We're talking in our small towns a gigabyte. We're trying to, in fact, have high service. We're not trying to just have service because our standard of service of some of these is so small. It does not meet the needs of rural. And so one good example, for instance, is the local medical clinic in one of our towns. It now has the ability to efficiently upload x-rays. Just the ability to have good health services within our communities is so important. And so these partnerships are extremely important, and we can't do these alone. And I just want to come back to, I've heard lots of comments today, and I'm going to deviate just a little bit. But I've been all around the world, and I've actually took a phone wherever I go, into some third world countries, and I'm seeing the cost there is I just can't believe it. You throw a few dollars down to get a month of service, including data. We come home and there's no competition whatsoever, and there is no incentive to have competition in rural Canada if we don't have that backbone infrastructure here. I know I hear competition bureau and so forth, but what we need to do is get the backbone of all of that infrastructure in place. Allow all the companies to that infrastructure. And you know what? I'm not worried if wherever that companies come, whether it's from Canada, United States, or anywhere in the world. We want to be competitive in rural Canada, and we need, as rural Canadians, to have that level. I don't even believe we have good 3G right now, let alone. I have so many drop calls, I can't believe it. So we're so far away from what we're hearing 5G in rural Canada, and I appreciate the question on 5G. We need to start something here that is, and our goal at Red Deer County is to get a gigabyte for fiber, to get at least 200 megabytes to our rural people, and to in fact have something that is not going to stall out. Currently, right now, people are paying for services they're not getting, and those services are slow that the internet actually stalls out. They put so many people on that one bandwidth that as people come on, it just kind of slows down and finally stops. And I think that we need to see that change, and that change will never happen without legislation. And I know I'm deviating from the purpose of your meeting today, but if that legislation comes into play, there is absolutely no need for Rogers or Shaw to, in fact, merge. They would actually be able to use that open network that's available, and everyone's going to thrive.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stein, your organization, the telecom sector, and in response to the larger telecom companies' extensive lobbying of the government to call into question CRTC's ruling on wholesale access rates, and you suggested we should adopt a system of retail minus rate setting, whereby the interim rates are automatically set at the incumbent's own retail price minus a set percentage. Can you explain what that suggestion is about and who it would help?
Sure. Well, the answer at the back is easy. It will help Canadians, but let me explain. So retail minus has been used in a number of places by the CRTC before, and our recommendation was that the CRTC use it to set interim rates. Remember, when the CRTC sets a rate, they've got to do a long study, they've got to figure everything out. But in the meantime, they know they're going there. So they set a rate in the meantime. And in the words of the chair of the CRTC the last time this committee met on that topic, he said, eventually, everybody's made whole. We just need an interim rate in the meantime. By setting it at retail minus, by setting a retail minus 50% or 30% or something, it's very easy to set that rate and make it a rate that competitors can use to offer competitive services. Unlike today, where not enough attention is spent on that rate. So instead, sometimes the interim rate is even more expensive than retail. For example, companies like the members of CNOC obviously cannot go ahead and create a competitive service and pay more for the service than a customer would in the own retail environment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll next go to MP Lambropoulos. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being with us today. I apologize in advance if my computer shuts off. I don't think it will, but it's been warning me several times to restart. So let's see what happens. I understand, and I'm hearing everybody saying that we need more competition. I fully agree. I think that the prices definitely need to drop, and I represent a very socio-economically diverse population. So very many people in my riding would definitely benefit from better prices, even though we live in Quebec. And so I agree with you 100%. It's just that currently not all communities in Canada are connected, but we don't have needed in order to connect everyone just yet. And part of this merger, as part of it, is a promise to connect rural and Indigenous communities, as many of you I'm sure have heard. And this is something that we don't hear very often because it's not worthwhile for big companies to necessarily go into these communities and to have them connected. So I'd like to know from you, what are ways that we can incentivize these big companies to build in these areas, especially if we're going to open the door to competition and allow everybody to use this infrastructure, as some of you have suggested. What are ways that we could incentivize and make sure that these companies see a reason or a need to actually go into these communities? Because the goal is really to have everybody connected as soon as we can.
Well, I'll take it, if I may, I'll go first. It's a very important issue, obviously, and it's something we support, our members support. But let me just say, competitors are not just competing on price. There are non-price factors that they compete on as well. And some of our members, for example, respond to the language needs of different community groups in Canada. The one thing you shouldn't do, this government and this committee shouldn't do, is recommend that a monopoly is somehow needed to solve this problem, because it hasn't worked. It has not. The monopoly isn't working. We're talking about this very large companies that were found by the CRTC to have engaged in misleading and aggressive sales practices with their customers in urban areas. So there has to be a certain amount of scrutiny on the motives these companies face. Now, with the right regulatory measures, which is wholesale open access, there will be a business case, and you will be able to let the smaller competitors ride on those networks. But those very much, these questions about rural investment, these companies that are at the same time taking Canada emergency wage subsidy, paying dividends at the same time, yet are earning abnormal rates of return. It's the business model you've got to be skeptical of in terms of how they're aligning their priorities, because it hasn't been serving the rural remote areas. It's the smaller competitors that our association represents, using a model that is tried, tested, and true from the CRTC that we suggest will work. And when the CRTC appears before you, if I may, I would ask them, when are you going to make your decision on mobile virtual network operators? Because that's really what's holding us back right now, and they won't give us an answer. And it's very unusual for a regulator to take such a long amount of time for an issue that everyone understands to be so important, yet we have zero indication in this industry of when this will happen.
I know that I noticed that Ms. Shaban also seemed eager to respond. So if you'd like to add as well, go for it.
Yeah, my quick comment is that perhaps the solution is not a market-based solution. Perhaps the solution is having communities themselves build infrastructure, just like Red Deer County. I also understand that the City of Toronto is implementing its own initiative to build Wi-Fi network. So perhaps we shouldn't be relying on the big telcos to build this infrastructure, because maybe there's just no way for it to be profitable to them or to hold them to account to actually follow through on their commitment.
I'd like to add in on there a couple of points too, and I think Robin is dead right. And the experience of Mayor Wood there is spot on. And the interesting thing is that Mayor Wood's experience is replicated across the country, and it has been for over a century. So the really important things right now, I think, a couple. One, the CRTC has just concluded its Rural Broadband Barriers Initiative. The story's all laid out there. The evidence is all laid out there. There's a problem. One of the problems there is the lack of regulatory fortitude. As I like to say, the regulator needs to steel its spine. The second thing, we have to stop juxtaposing MVNOs versus the fourth Maverick player, because as soon as T-Mobile in the United States was told that it could by AT&T, one of the things that it did was that it opened up its wholesale access infrastructure to MVNOs, and MVNOs in the United States took off. So we need both. It's not either or. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much.
So seeing as we have a few minutes left, what we'll do is we'll do another round of slots for each of the parties. We'll start with MP Dreeshen. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Just trying to find my mute button. Certainly, I think I'd like to go back to Mr. Stein, and if he could just flesh out a little bit more on the wholesale access rates. And I'd also like to add into that, you'd also suggested that we should consider splitting the large incumbents into two parts, retail and wholesale. And you suggested if these things don't happen, competition is going to suffer permanent damage. I wonder if you could expand on what you feel those proposals would be like, and how would this address the merger that would be?
All right, there are a few things in there, but in the interest of time, I think I'll start at the back. What you're referring to when you talked about splitting up the major telcos is structural separation. Separation where the infrastructure I referred to earlier as the infrastructure owners, the underlying infrastructure is owned by one company, and the retail operation, the brand, the customers, and so forth, is in another. By setting it up that way, as has been done in some other countries around the world, some very large economies, by setting it up that way, the retail body ends up buying on well understood and well disclosed terms from the infrastructure body. But at the same time, other retail bodies can do so at the same rate, with the same tools, with the same prices, with the same timelines, and so forth. This enables service competition, service-based competition, which is exactly what I was referring to earlier. I think that covered your question.
Yes, thank you very much. And perhaps now, if I could go back to Mayor Wood. We've been discussing some of the concerns and issues, and I think pretty well every one of either the witnesses or people on from our committee have talked about the importances of municipalities being able to do what is necessary to make things work for them. I'm just wondering if you could expand somewhat on what you think the federal government could focus its efforts on to encourage smaller companies to provide broadband services to rural areas.
Well, I think the first thing is that they're just not going to do it. They will not come in if the dollars are not there. So if we're going to, in fact, make this happen, we have to have that open competition to be able to use that network that is already there. If they can use that network that is already there and be competitive to provide that service, we know that the free market will work. What's happening right now is the free market is not working because the cost of the investment is so high no one can afford to get into more rural markets. And so I'm going to repeat, probably sound like I'm repeating myself again, but I think it's extremely important that we need to partner between all levels of government to build that fiber backbone into the most rural areas. If we do that and create an open network, and I see lots of nods earlier on talking about this, that will be the way that we in fact encourage these small companies, and they will come up. You know, the company that's providing service for us right now is a small company. And what I've noticed is that if we give them the opportunity to tender in and tender against the larger companies, what we found was that we were getting tenders of 50% less than a major companies. I'm not going to say the names today. I wouldn't be fair because it was a tender, but we got 50% less cost and larger service as we're providing. So what I would suggest is that we need to in fact go into a competitive network to in fact build this backbone and have the government, federal government, provincial government, and local governments work towards somehow to establish this. We would be very, very willing to share the part that we've done already. But the problem that we're having right now is that we undertook this particular project with some hope that we might get some help from others. But we were not going to wait forever. You know, we've already outlined that we've heard from many. This is an essential service across Canada. As having a decent, if we're going to remain competitive in the world, we have to in fact be able to in fact compete. Rural Alberta, where I live, I'm a farmer when I'm not the mayor. I'm very, very proud to be a fifth generation farmer. That we, in fact, need technology. The technology is growing and growing and growing. And that I'm finding that we have now people that are, in fact, sending me emails saying, if you bring this technology in to Red Deer County, I want to move there. I want to bring my business there. And we're seeing we're an area of extreme growth. We're a little different than most, but we're fortunate enough to have a few dollars to put into this. Some of my neighboring municipalities are not as fortunate as we are.
Thank you. We'll now move to MP Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Ben, you've talked about the efficiencies defense. It was brought to my attention from a competition lawyer that we're also unique in some ways in the competition context here in Canada, in that if the transaction is approved, that the Bureau can't review an M&A transaction after a year, and other jurisdictions are able to look back much further. Is this your view as well? And do you think that's another area that we might want to consider changing going forward?
Yeah, so something that's interesting about the merger review process in Canada is that there's two types of clearance. And one of the types of clearance commits to not even reviewing a merger after it's been approved. And I understand too that even if there are these conditions, these review condition timeframes, they may be smaller than in other jurisdictions. There's all sorts of, smaller aspects of the act that when you take it all together, it really hampers the Competition Bureau's ability to do its job and not only monitor competition, but also take action when competition is threatened, both in the merger context as well as other parts of the Competition Act.
If you could, it's beyond the purview, I think, of our focus study on the Rogers Shaw deal. But if you could submit a brief at some point to the committee outlining some other areas of concern in the Competition Act, I personally would find that invaluable. I want to move to. Thank you very much. I want to move to Mr. Stein and Mr. White, specifically as it relates to service-based versus facilities-based competition. I've put the same questions to the telcos when they come to our committee. There's a reseller space when it comes to broadband, so why not recreate the reseller space as it relates to MVNOs? Seems pretty sensible from a consumer point of view to drive down prices. At the same time, if we put the argument back that the telcos make that we need to build out network more and they hold out 5G, this great promise of 5G, how do we, when you say service-based competition can deliver what Mr. Wood wants for his community, I mean, isn't it the case that we do want private investment building out additional network, and that if we open up that space immediately, that there may be some disincentives to make those investments? How do we square that?
Well, first off, you referred to what Mr. Wood would want, but earlier today, Mayor Wood talked about the the story we all remember of long distance. We all remember, most of us would remember spending 30 cents a minute for a call from Montreal to Toronto. Those days are long behind us because of service-based competition. We would all remember paying $40, $50 a month for home phone. Those days are behind us due to service-based competition. And much the same with internet, although it's sort of faltered in the past couple of years. So that's important to understand. The other side regarding investment, there is always, there's two pieces there. Number one, the CRTC designs these rates with the cost to build it in mind. They take the cost of capital, they take the cost to build, they take interest, they take everything. Plus they apply a markup. All the ability to directly monetize or even over monetize Canadians. That's all that service-based competition limits. The other thing, and I'll just throw this out there, we're talking about the same companies who are receiving millions or in many cases billions of dollars of public money, who are then whining that they need to get a better return. Public money
I
has
hear you on
just
that. They'll get no sympathy from me on that front.
Well, I felt that it's important. Sorry.
I agree. No, I completely agree with the comment. With limited time, I guess one question I had is in relation to this particular transaction. If the CRTC were to say MVNO is completely open, away we go, we're growing competition, does that have an impact on your view of this deal? Are we going to care as much about this deal if MVNOs are approved in full?
I think you still care, but it's important. The most important thing is that there is an instigator of competition. MVNOs, if starting from zero, will eventually build up to become instigators of competition. Freedom Wind was there. Freedom, to a slightly lesser extent, is there now. So it still matters. The way those play together, as I believe it was Mr. Winsek suggested, the way those play together would be to have that completely open MVNO, and then to also insist the customers and brand of Freedom be divested into an MVNO or into multiple MVNOs to give them some momentum and see things get going.
Thanks very much. And I think I'm out of time. When it comes to 5G getting built, it seems like I should get 3G pennies on the dollar, and that would address the income digital divide that we have. But I've run out of time. So anyway, thanks very much, Mr. Stein.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to Député Lemire. Vous avez 2 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question will be for Mr. Klaas. Only 91% of Canadians are subscribers to wireless. Can you talk about the difference between the actual situation and the potential that we could achieve?
Yeah, so when you look at adoption levels in Canada, not only are we significantly behind levels in comparable countries, but you find that the disparity is primarily concentrated amongst the lower income. So while you have almost universal adoption amongst the well-off, those families earning less than 50 or 70K a year are really struggling to meet their bills, right? We've heard that maybe 3G for penny on the dollars is good enough, but I say that in Canada we shouldn't accept poor internet for poor people. There isn't some different thing about people earning less money where they don't need the cell phone service. What we need is to bring down prices to meet this crucial need, especially in a time where the economic situation of everyone is being pressed upon, and the demand for communication services is greater than ever. I think that this merger is certainly not going to address that problem. It will, if anything, exacerbate that concern. And to the extent that we've seen improvements in this situation, it's been due to the advances of communication competition from companies offering lower prices and more data.
Just like to add one thing to Ben, if I can there. It's not just the kind of downward pressure on adoption rates. It's even once you do have adoption, it's the pressure, it's the constraints placed on usage that have, kept Canadian rates, half the OECD level or a third of the US levels. I mean, the US was at where Canada is now 5 years ago. Okay. So these are significant constraints on what people can and cannot do with their mobile phones, with their mobile internet.
Just a follow-up question. Mr. White, I think you wanted to answer my other question, but I want to say that you talked about the low density should not be a factor that we take into consideration. So could you just speak a little bit more to that?
I understand the question to be, does the low population density affect the price we pay? No, the lack of competition affects the price that we pay in Canada. The rates that members of this association we represent charge for home internet are 5 to 35% lower. And if you open that up in the wireless space by recommending that in your report, it will be a huge, bold win for Canadians.
Thank you very much. And our last round will go to MP Massey. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think we've apparently solved everything in the telco sector here this afternoon, but I am going to go back to the original premise of what we have here, and maybe Mr. Geist, I'll go, Professor Geist, go to you. So if we say no to this merger right now, there's going to be a lot of suggestions about the big fallout of not doing this. What do you think is, going to take place next? I know it's a big crystal balling in that, but we've seen Rogers make a play already on Cogeco, a hostile takeover. We've seen now this as is really a shift in our market and consolidate versus build, and should our public policy be really pushing back and saying no, we need to be building, not consolidating?
Well, it's a great question. I think Ben early referenced the prospect that SaskTel would be next on the shopping list for some of the players if this goes ahead. I think this is, I think in some ways the Manitoba deal set this up. It sent the message that it was possible to get these deals through as long as you provided a grab bag of goodies and just say, hey, look at all the nice things you're going to get if you pass this. But then we do see that there is a cost to be paid. We've seen it in terms of the kind of innovation and pricing that takes place in that market. If the signal coming out of this is that this goes ahead, then I think it becomes open season for some of those remaining players. If we stop it here, I think that it reaffirms that strong signal that consumers and competition are the policy priority in the country. And as long as we twin it with things like MVNOs, as we've been hearing about, there is at least the prospect of better competition and better pricing in the country.
Thank you. And with that, Madam Chair, on a positive note, we will conclude. Back to you, unless you have questions. Sorry, that's not my role.
Thank you so much, MP Massey. Thank you, everyone, for your excellent testimony today. It's been very enlightening. And I just wanted, before we adjourn, I want to remind the members if they can get their witness lists to the clerk as soon as possible for the next study. And for Ms. Shaban, if you could submit that brief to the clerk, he will make sure that it gets circulated in both official languages to the committee members. So with that, thank you everyone for being with us today. Merci beaucoup au service de traduction.
Thank you very much to our interpreters. It's always a pleasure.
Meeting adjourned.